She turned back to the room. "Ibrahim," she whispered. He stirred. She was already moving to the safe drawer behind the closet, code memorized, mind awake. A thin, black handgun rested atop emergency comms. She grabbed both. "Ibrahim," she said again, louder this time. He blinked, sat up. "What is it?" "Get dressed. We're under attack." He stared for half a breath, then everything changed. Within seconds, the president of Burkina Faso was on his feet, pulling on dark fatigues. Aissata handed him the radio, but the channel crackled uselessly, jammed. A soft explosion trembled through the far corridor they had breached. Still no alarms, still no guards. That's when she knew it. They weren't just infiltrated. They were isolated. She turned to him. "We can't wait." They knew where to hit. Ibrahim reached for the emergency beacon, but she stopped him. "Too late. If they've cut comms, that signal won't break out in time." Outside the window, more movement. This time unmistakable, black-clad figures with assault rifles, coordinated and swift. Not amateurs, not local rebels. This was trained. He looked at her. "We run," she nodded. "The tunnel," he hesitated. "It hasn't been used in decades." She gave a thin smile. "Then it's due." Aissata grabbed a backpack from the armoire, already packed. Supplies, documents, medicine. She had prepared this not out of fear, but out of quiet foresight. Not for him, for both. They moved into the hallway, crouched low, footsteps silent against stone. The compound was a maze of colonial-era architecture, modernized above, ancient beneath. Aissata knew the layout. She had studied it. And as they passed the final doorway before the west wing, she whispered a final prayer. "If they find us, it won't be because we stood still." The knock at 3 a.m. had come. But it was she who answered it, to be continued in part 2, through her eyes. Even before the clock struck midnight, the fortress began to crack from within. Inside the presidential compound, security agents moved with heightened awareness, but there was unease beneath the surface. Colonel Sekou, ever vigilant, monitored internal communications. Yet something about the flow of information felt off. Messages weren't relaying in sequence. Routes normally encrypted were glitching, and one of the compound's subchannels had gone completely dark. That's when Red Fox spoke. "We're compromised." The room froze. President Traoré, already suited in a dark flak jacket beneath his robe, looked to him with sharp precision. "How many?" Red Fox tapped on a ruggedized tablet, the Cyrillic interface foreign to all but him. "2 operatives inside the signal relay wing. Possibly more. They've rerouted intel to an outside receiver, likely at the abandoned French communications tower east of Ouaga." Sekou cursed under his breath. "That tower was deactivated a year ago. Only on paper," Red Fox said. "It's alive now, and it's listening." President Traoré wasted no time. "We shut it down, quietly." Colonel Caboret volunteered. Within minutes, a tactical team of 6 elite operatives deployed from an underground exit, weaving through alleyways as the city slumbered in oblivion. But at the compound, the traitors hadn't waited to be discovered. A junior logistics officer was found trying to transmit something using a satellite phone buried beneath canned supplies. He didn't resist, he smiled, like a man who'd already won. They interrogated him quickly, and though he said little, what they did extract was devastating. He had not been alone. Someone higher, someone close, Salif Sanogo. A senior advisor with 20 years in Burkina Faso's defense ministry. A man who had dined beside Traoré, toasted victories, and helped draft the very security doctrine they now depended on. Sanogo had gone dark 2 hours earlier. They found his office ransacked, a drawer pried open, keycards missing. "He's moving with purpose," Sekou muttered. "He knows where every blind spot is." At the same time, a distress beacon pinged across the Russian listening post in Guinea. It was encoded in the same style as the Raven call, but something was wrong. "This one wasn't sent by us," Red Fox said. "It's bait." Then it all became clear. The traitors inside weren't just leaking information. They were feeding false triggers to provoke foreign engagement, to incite a strike. The plan was brilliant in its cruelty. Lure Russian response teams into the air, force a confrontation, and once two nuclear-armed nations stood face-to-face over the skies of Burkina Faso, chaos would justify intervention. The West could claim it had no choice. They would call it peacekeeping. Traore stared at the flickering monitors. They want us erased not by assassination but by implosion, a proxy spark. Red Fox nodded, and they nearly lit the match. But hope came from an unlikely source. One of Traore's personal drivers, a young man named Malik, reported having seen Sanogo slip out of the compound not long ago, headed toward the east gate, a briefcase clutched to his chest. "Follow him," Traore said, "but do not engage until confirmed." A drone was launched from a camouflaged post in the southern garden. Its feed showed a black SUV racing across the deserted stretch toward the old French tower. 20 minutes later, the tactical team reached it. Inside, equipment glowing, screens active, and Sanogo alone, broadcasting encrypted messages to an orbiting satellite. They breached. He didn't resist, but again he smiled. "You're already too late," he whispered. Back in the war room, Red Fox stared at his screen. Then slowly his eyes widened. A series of red dots appeared off the western coast, naval-based F-35 fighters, launched from a carrier in the Gulf of Guinea, now turning inland. "They're coming," he said, "and they think we struck first." President Traoré exhaled sharply. "Then it's time we showed them they're not the only ones watching the skies." He turned to the far wall where an old Soviet-era phone, long unused, hung like an artifact. He picked it up. "This is Falcon," he said into the receiver. "The bear is clear to roar." The line went silent for 5 seconds. Then a single word came back, thick with accent and certainty. "Understood." Above the Sahel, thunder rumbled, but not from clouds. At precisely 02:43 a.m., the skies over Burkina Faso darkened in ways no sandstorm could explain. Military-grade jammers, strategically activated along a northern arc, cut power grids and disrupted communications across Ouagadougou. Whole districts were plunged into a surreal, flickering blackout. Streetlights blinked out. Cellular towers went mute. The only thing that moved freely now was fear. Inside the presidential compound, emergency generators whirred to life. Red lights bathed the corridors. Soldiers moved in silence, weapons drawn, every step echoing like a countdown. President Traoré stood in the secondary command bunker, staring at the massive display screen where radar signatures danced erratically. "They're almost within range," Red Fox said, voice low. 4 inbound fighters, supersonic, no transponders, origin points scrambled. Colonel Sekou cursed under his breath. "We won't see them, not on this equipment. They'll be overhead before we hear the sound." But not all systems were blind. From a decommissioned weather station deep in the Gurma region, a signal pulsed into the ether. It was not Burkina Faso tech, nor African. Its code structure was Cyrillic, its encryption layered in Slavic precision. Within moments, the feed was mirrored in the presidential bunker. Across the map appeared 3 new blips, non-Western high-speed interceptors entering from the southeast, flying low and fast. Red Fox grinned. "Your bear is coming." Thousands of feet above the red earth, while Ouagadougou slept in darkness, 2 worlds collided in silence. The American jets, sleek and predatory, locked onto their phantom target coordinates. Their onboard AI calculated routes, jamming patterns, and strike zones. They had done this before. Syria, Libya, Somalia, but not here, not this time. Because just as the strike team broke into formation, the unthinkable happened. A warning signal flashed across their HUDs. Active lock-on detected. From behind them, 6 aircraft had appeared, stealth Su-57s, long whispered to be stationed somewhere in Africa, but never confirmed. They flanked the American fighters like ghosts, cloaked until the last second. In cockpit after cockpit, American pilots hesitated. Their training screamed at them to respond, but rules of engagement were strict. Firing on Russian aircraft, especially unprovoked, would escalate beyond any operation command could cover. The skies above Ouagadougou became a frozen tableau. Two apex predators circling, radar warnings blaring, target locks pinging back and forth like lightning. At ground level, Traore watched the feed. "They're bluffing," Traore said. "The Americans won't retreat unless they think they're already compromised." Traore turned to Red Fox. "Make them think it." With a series of commands, Red Fox activated a dormant Russian satellite feed. A simulated strike formation, a holographic ghost squadron, was projected into the airspace 60 kilometers north of the American jets. To radar, it looked real. It looked massive. The effect was immediate. The American pilots began banking west, one after another. Communications scrambled through encrypted relay, mission abort, false intel, high-risk interference. Within 6 minutes, the F-35s had disengaged and retreated over the border into Mali, then toward the Gulf. Ouagadougou exhaled. But Traore did not. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "This wasn't a warning shot, this was a test." Red Fox nodded. "Next time they won't come from the sky, they'll use someone who bleeds like us." Sekou looked to Traore. "Do we respond?" Traore stared into the map, its lights fading. "No speeches, no retaliation, just the truth. We survived because we saw the shadows before they touched the ground." He stepped out of the command room into the orange glow of the horizon, Ouagadougou slowly waking beneath a foreign peace. The capital was intact, but the game had changed. The early morning silence in Ouagadougou was interrupted by the low, rhythmic thrum of helicopters circling above the palace compound. Though the skies were now clear, the tension remained thick, hanging over the capital like a curtain of static. Few civilians knew how close their world had come to ignition. Fewer still would ever understand the price paid to avoid it. In the underground chamber of the presidential palace, President Ibrahim Traoré sat before a steel table marked with fresh tactical overlays. His hands were clasped tightly. He had not slept. Across from him stood Red Fox, unusually still. On the monitors beside them, a secure transmission crackled to life. The Kremlin's insignia hovered for a brief second before disappearing, replaced by a face. "General Anatoly Baranov." "Falcon," Baranov said, his voice like gravel. "You live." "For now," Traore replied. Baranov's nod was slow, deliberate. "The bear's shadow covered you last night, but it was too close, too fast." "We saw the jet trails from the rooftops," Traore said, leaning forward. "We felt the heat. That wasn't deterrence. That was war with training wheels." Red Fox interjected. "We need guarantees, not guesses. The F-35s came from the carrier USS Liberty. We confirmed it through visual signature comparison and signal origin. They denied involvement, lied without blinking." Baranov's eyes narrowed. "So then we give them a reason to blink." A new screen opened beside the call, satellite imagery. In it, a convoy of military vehicles was spotted crossing a narrow strip in Niger, headed toward a known French base recently vacated. Another image showed crates being unloaded, marked in Cyrillic. It wasn't just Burkina Faso anymore. The bear had moved further south. "Joint exercises," Baranov said. "Unmarked, off record. No flags, no speeches, but if they come back, they won't leave with just scratches." Traore studied the images. "You've deployed more than air cover. We've deployed memory," Baranov said, "so they don't forget Syria or Donbass or Belgrade." Silence settled over the room. Traore stood. "We don't want to become someone's battlefield, not west, not east, but we won't be anyone's experiment either." Baranov's tone softened. Then stand strong, but don't stand alone. The transmission ended. Outside the chamber, Colonel Sekou was coordinating a media blackout. No leaks, no premature narratives. The international community remained largely unaware of what had transpired in the last 12 hours. But fragments were already floating. Whispers of Russian planes, foreign interference, even drone footage posted by a teenager in Koudougou showing a glowing triangular formation streaking across the clouds. Inside Burkina Faso's borders, the response was swift but quiet. Checkpoints were reinforced. Strategic communications were rerouted through secured landlines. Traore issued one directive above all: watch those closest. Because Red Fox had been right, the next wave wouldn't come cloaked in metal but in flesh. Advisors, diplomats, contractors, journalists. Traore knew better than to trust any suit that didn't sweat in the Sahel. By dusk, Red Fox reported a new movement. Russian electronic warfare units had established a mobile hub disguised as a mining operation near the border with Ghana. Not a threat, an eye. They'll deny it exists, he said, but if they move again, that eye will blink first. Traore walked out into the courtyard. The call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance. The city, shaken but whole, pulsed with life. A child kicked a can down the road. A fruit vendor wiped dust from his wares. The world had almost changed overnight, but the bear had shown its teeth, and the falcon, for now, still flew. By the time the morning fog lifted over Ouagadougou's skyline, Burkina Faso's airspace was no longer just a patch of sky. It had become a razor-thin boundary between provocation and catastrophe. The failed strike had not ended tensions, it had merely changed their shape. Now, the threat wasn't in the air, it was in the uncertainty. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in a reinforced intelligence chamber, eyes fixed on a black glass table displaying a real-time, multinational battlefield simulation. It wasn't a map of his country, it was a chessboard of global nerves. Movement detected near the Ghana border, Red Fox reported. 5 reconnaissance drones, low altitude, civilian markings, but their path mirrors known reconnaissance flight lines. Traore didn't look away. And in the south? Colonel Sekou responded. French satellite relay stations have gone active again. They've triangulated multiple listening nodes into a tight grid formation. They're not gathering intelligence. They're laying coordinates. Traore tapped the table, meaning if one bullet is fired the wrong way, Red Fox finished the sentence. It'll light the sky. At 12:06 p.m., an alert flashed across the main screen. One of the Russian forward-operating radars, disguised in the mining zone, picked up 6 high-speed objects breaking formation above the Gulf of Guinea. Unknown, but consistent with hypersonic test profiles. Could be bluff, said Red Fox. Could be bait, said Sekou. Could be real, said Traore. The room fell silent. Orders were given. Burkina Faso's modest but highly trained air defense network shifted into activation posture. Mobile batteries were moved into civilian infrastructure, stadiums, reservoirs, and parks. Not as shields, but as deterrents. To any eye in the sky, a strike now would mean civilian casualties, and no nation wanted that footage playing on global feeds. In a closed-call meeting, Traore reached out to Algeria, Mali, and Guinea. This is not just about us, he said. This is about whether our skies are our own. Guinea pledged to scramble legacy MiGs. Algeria promised radar support. Mali offered to ground its own aircraft to avoid misidentification. Africa, fractured but waking, was beginning to blink in unison. And then it happened. At 2:17 p.m., an American fighter broke formation. It drifted eastward toward the Burkina Faso border, breaching the 200-kilometer red line established by Traoré's Defense Council. Alarms shrieked. Defense crews readied launch keys. But before anyone could fire, the screen changed. New blips appeared. 5 Russian Su-57s rising like shadows from behind the Ghanaian horizon. Not charging, not aggressive, just there. One Russian pilot activated an open frequency and spoke into the void. Not another step. The American jet hesitated, then turned back. A full 90 seconds passed before all enemy signatures began retreating. In the bunker, no one moved. No cheers. No adrenaline bursts. Only the shared realization of what almost was. Red Fox whispered, "We were 10 seconds from impact." Traore nodded slowly. "And 1 breath from war." Outside, life went on. Children played in dusty courtyards. Vendors returned to their routines. The city had no idea that its entire history had dangled over a cliff and returned, breathless but intact. Traore walked outside, raised his eyes to the blue sky and let the sun touch his face. Not as a politician, not as a commander, but as a man who had just walked the blade's edge and come back whole. The news never broke. There were no headlines, no press briefings, no satellite footage analyzed on international television. What nearly sparked a global incident dissolved into shadows before it could catch fire. And yet, in the quiet, everything changed. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of the Ouagadougou military airstrip, his boots coated in the red dust that curled like smoke behind arriving transports. One of the Russian aircraft sat silent nearby, its cockpit empty, its purpose complete. No flags were raised, no cameras allowed. Just nods between men who understood that history had turned in silence. The Su-57s had vanished into the clouds hours after the American jets pulled back. No engagement, no missiles, just presence, enough to speak without a single bullet. The world, for once, had heard. In the following days, embassies grew eerily polite. The American ambassador, pale and smiling too often, paid a surprise visit to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. France issued a statement praising Burkina Faso's commitment to stability. NATO went quiet. And the global press busied itself elsewhere with economic summits and royal weddings. The silence was intentional. The message was clear. Nothing happened here and it better stay that way. Inside Burkina Faso, however, everything had changed. Traoré convened with leaders from the Sahel Alliance, Niger, Mali, Guinea, and Central African Republic. In a closed-door summit beneath a nondescript concrete hall, they signed the Ouagadougou Accords, an unspoken defense pact, a commitment to mutual sovereignty, unaligned and unafraid. Security, Traoré said to them, is not a loan from the West. It is a right born with our borders. Red Fox had already begun his quiet departure. His mission, though never officially acknowledged, had ended with a message scrawled on a slip of paper left in the war room. Bears don't roar, they watch. Colonel Sekou expanded the Cyber Defense Division. Burkina Faso's tech sector, once an afterthought, became the heartbeat of national defense. Former street hackers were recruited. Encryption became national curriculum. The country had learned its lesson. Sovereignty begins in the sky, but it survives in silence. Traoré himself changed too. His speeches grew shorter, his visits to military outposts more frequent. The people loved him more now, but differently. Not as a revolutionary, but as a shield. A man who had faced giants and stayed standing. And yet he never told them the full truth. Not about the jets, not about the whispers, not about how close they had come to ceasing to exist. Because some truths are too loud. Instead, he stood on the rooftop of the palace on the eve of Independence Day. The city below was lit not by drones or searchlights, but by candles placed in windows by ordinary citizens who still remembered the blackouts. A silent tribute to a night they would never understand. The sky above was still, clear, and full of stars. Traoré watched the horizon for a long time, waiting not for planes but for peace to finally feel real. Behind him, a child approached, the son of one of the soldiers stationed nearby. The boy handed him a paper airplane, clumsily folded. "For you," the child said, "in case they come back." Traore smiled. He took the paper craft in his hand, held it against the wind, and let it fly. No sound, no war, just a boy, a president, and the silence that saved a nation. The night was still, the guards were posted, the gates were locked, but when danger came for the presidency, it didn't knock on the front door, it slipped through the dark. In this opening chapter, find out what really happened at 3 a.m. inside the walls of power, and how one woman's instincts shattered protocol to change the course of a nation. Welcome to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe now for the story they tried to bury. It was precisely 3:02 a.m. when the first echo hit the southern wall. A deep, hollow thud, soft enough to be mistaken for shifting wind, loud enough to be wrong. The presidential residence, nestled inside the high-walled compound in Ouagadougou, lay cloaked in darkness. The air was thick, too quiet. Inside the bedroom, Aissata Traoré sat bolt upright. She wasn't prone to nightmares. Her sleep was sharp and disciplined, the way a woman learned to rest when she shared her life with a soldier-turned-president. But this time her eyes opened with a precision that had no name. Something was off. She didn't reach for her husband, not yet. She listened. Then came the second sound, closer. Not a knock, not a door, a vibration in the walls. She turned to Ibrahim. He was still asleep, breath steady, but the tension in her chest wouldn't fade. Years before she was First Lady, Aissata had served briefly as a battlefield nurse during the Sahel counterinsurgency. She had seen what the first minutes of a firefight looked like, not gunshots, but disorientation. Static, quiet collapses before the storm. She slipped from bed, barefoot, and padded across the marble floor toward the window. The lights at the far perimeter, normally bright along the southern fence, were dead, not flickering, gone, and between the hedges she saw something move. Two shadows, no formation, too fast for patrol, too slow for maintenance.